My name's Chris, and today we are checking out the song Haunted by Design by Myles Kennedy. Who's that guy? Right over there. We're really just going to be looking at the main riff here because I found it's a really great introduction to the technique called Travis picking, which, if you're not familiar, is named after the artist Merle Travis and revolves around the idea of an alternating thumb pattern. So what we're going to do first is just break down that alternating thumb pattern, if that's new for you, and then talk about the melody notes pretty slowly, kind of going one at a time, because with finger picking riffs like this, it can kind of get overwhelming if you're looking at all the notes all at once. So what we're going to do is look at the melody notes in relation to whether they fall on a thumb pick or off of a thumb pick. It's a great way to keep you focused and a little bit more organized in learning this song. Makes it a lot less scary. So let's get to the thumb picking pattern. This whole riff is based off of one chord, and that chord is G7. So what you're going to do with your fretting hand is set your third finger on the third fret of the low E string. That's the G note, the root. The only other finger you need to put down at the beginning is the first finger on your high E string playing the F note. It's the flat 7. Normally, in a G7 chord, we would put our second finger down on fret 2 of the A string, but we never play that string in this riff, so we don't need it. Instead, what we're going to do is use the inside of that third finger to lightly touch that string to muffle it. So worst case scenario, you accidentally bump into it or graze it with your thumb. It's not going to make a sound. So the thumb pattern. We're going back and forth between the low E string and the D string. Now on the low E string, you never leave that third fret, so that's just planted right there as an anchor, never goes away. And then the D string is open, so we don't have to worry about anything with our fretting fingers for that. What's going on is this. Just back and forth. It's really boring when you play it by itself, but that's kind of the point. It's supposed to be the foundation for the riff so that the melody notes have something to be playing over. This is your first step in practicing this riff. You just want to get really, really good at going back and forth between that and not having to think about it. That's kind of key. If you notice, I was talking while I was playing it because I wasn't thinking about it at all. It was just kind of automatic. We want to just set that and forget it so we can concentrate on the more melodic things. So practice that with a metronome. Do it slowly. That has to be your strong rhythmic foundation for the riff. Just sitting there doing this. So what I'm going to do now is play through the entire riff slowly, and what I want you to do is just play that thumb pattern along with me to see how that fits in context of the whole riff. Here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Nice. So what we're going to do now is zoom in on both hands, and we're going to break it down one note at a time to put the whole melody and rhythm part together. All right, so let's get into it. Like I said before, we're making a G7 chord over here with our fretting hand. Quick note about what fingers you're going to use for your picking hand. Obviously, as said before, the thumb's going to handle the low E and the D string. I'm going to be using my ring finger over here in my right hand for the high E string mostly, and my middle finger for the B string mostly. I tend to not use my index finger a lot when I'm finger picking because that's where I hide the pick if I'm switching back and forth between using a pick or doing finger style. See how I tuck it in like that? So usually the index finger sits this out for me. All right, so we're going to be doing this very slowly, one note at a time, and we're going to be keeping track of our melody notes by saying whether or not they land with the thumb note. Okay, so we start by playing the high E string and the low E string together. So our first note lands with the thumb. The next note lands off of the thumb, but you don't pick it. You're doing a pull off from 1 to 0 on the high E string. So here's the first move. Then the thumb is going to go to the D string. So here's what we got so far. Okay. All right, next up. Our next melody note lands in between the bass notes, and that's our pinky going to the third fret of the B string here, playing a D note. So we have on, off, off. All right, so we just played the D string with our thumb, so now we're going to hit the thumb by itself. So that's a great first chunk to start practicing here, just doing this by itself really slowly. All right, next up we have another melody note that lands off of the beat, and that's the open high E string. Here's everything so far. And then we just played the low E string with our thumb, so now that's going to go to the D string. No notes on top of that one. Again, I'm starting from the beginning every time because that's what I want you to do with your practicing. Only go one note at a time and make sure you can play everything up until that point. That's really important. And good news for us, we're halfway through the first measure now. Now, if you look on the tab, that's hopefully displayed on the screen somewhat visibly, the next half of the measure is a lot more simple. So we're going to be starting from there. Our first finger is going to move from fret 1 on the high E string to fret 1 on the B string. And we're playing that with the thumb note. All right, and then we go to the D string by itself. Then we let go of that B string to play open with the thumb. And then you go to the D string by itself again. So you can totally practice this second half of the bar by itself. It's a little bit simpler, and it's kind of a nice early win to give yourself when you're practicing this, because you can probably get this down quicker than the first part. So here's just this second half. 3 and 4 and. Here it is again. All right, now we're going to put the whole measure together. So the great news is every other measure here from here on out, the next 3, are all a variation of this first one that we did. Sometimes they're even a little bit simpler, like measure 2. Here's what it looks like. It's exactly the same, except we don't even go to that open B string at the end of the bar. You just let that C note ring out here on fret 1 and continue with your thumb picking pattern. See what I mean about that being independent from the rest of the melody? That just keeps on trucking along. All right, so the third measure, as is so often the case, is the same as the first measure. And then our fourth measure is the same concept as measure 2, but instead of staying on fret 1 here, we're going to go up to a high G note. So our pinky again is hanging out on fret 3, but this time on the high E string. Here's measure 4 in its entirety. So the tricky little move right there is getting the pinky, who doesn't always want to cooperate, to go from the B string to the high E string. I'll play it for you again. All right, so here's the riff, put all the way together, nice and slow. 3 and 4 and. And that's the riff. So like I said at the beginning, you want to approach a riff like this really slowly, kind of methodically, especially if this technique is brand new to you. Don't be afraid to spend a lot of time just doing that alternating thumb pattern first. It'll just make it easier for you to put the whole riff together again later. And then from there, one note at a time, really, really slowly. Don't bite off more than you can chew. That's honestly the faster way to go about doing things. If you try to rush into everything all the way, it'll just be more frustrating. Doing it this way will save you plenty of time, I promise. But that's all I got for you. I'll see you later.